Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the Wine with Jimmy channel. You probably know what it's about by now, but if you don't, then this is a wine educational channel designed to help those of you who are just immersing yourself in the wonderful world of wine. Now, a lot of the series I do are to help people with their studies, students studying the world of wine. But here we have actually a more immersive cultural history sort of look at a wine region, not necessarily following a syllabus, but just because I love the wines from this country. So we are looking at the wines of Georgia, and it's actually a massively multi-part series. So you'll see that we have 17 videos in the Wines of Georgia section, and we're about halfway. So we are on part 9 here, looking at white winemaking. This video, along with the next couple, are all talking about the white winemaking techniques. So white winemaking, amber or orange winemaking, and red winemaking. So sort of the general concepts behind the winemaking. Now, I'd love to hear from you if you have perhaps made wine in Georgia, or you've just enjoyed it. Maybe you've experienced the brilliant, fantastic hospitality and culture of the country by visiting places like Tbilisi or Imereti. Let me know in the comments below. Even if you have any questions as well, pop them there. Make sure you click like and subscribe, as it helps me and it helps you. Okay, so you can also get in touch by social media. You'll see at the bottom of every slide. Now, the first thing we need to really talk about in terms of white winemaking is the kind of two groups that you find from Georgian wines. So when a Georgian talks about traditional Georgian winemaking, they will mean wines that are crafted in a qvevri, in an amphora clay pot, the traditional clay pot of Georgia. If they talk about classical winemaking, this means the European methods. Okay, so we're talking about stainless steel and oak, for example. I'll go through that on the next slide. Now, white wines that are produced in a qvevri almost always have some skin contact. They don't have to, but it's very typical that skin contact will happen. So, for example, that will produce an amber wine, and that will in fact be covered on the next video. We'll look at qvevri wine production and amber wine styles. Okay, so that's what you see on the right hand side. Now, some people call these orange wines, others amber wines, others skin contact wines. But as you'll see, it's the fourth color of wine. We have reds and rosés, we have whites, but then we have our ambers or oranges, as we call it. So what about those classical winemaking methods, what we call European winemaking methods? So white wines that are produced in Georgia that are through the European method will be those that are fermented in stainless steel, like you see in this picture, or in oak. It's basically following the principles of Western Europe. So what we know about places like France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Hungary, and so on. The aging can be in either as well, stainless steel or oak. And of course, we may even use concrete and plastic, whatever it may be. It's a method of producing the wine. Dry, semi-sweet, sweet, sparkling, and fortified wine styles are made, but most commonly, our typical styles are the dry and semi-sweet wine styles. So remembering, if you watch these videos all the way through this series, you will have gone through my quite extensive history, and we know that there was a huge influence from the neighbor to the north, the Soviet Union today, Russia, of course, and a lot of the wines which were cultivated for that market were the sweeter ones. So reds with sweetness, whites with sweetness, for example, and moving away from traditional or dry examples. So, of course, those examples will still exist today. Modern winemakers are today studying terroir, They're understanding their grape varieties. There's clonal research. There is work within the winery, heavy selection, the use of ambient yeasts, skin contact and varying the amounts of skin contact. There's a lot of innovation and creativity going into the winemaking technique. So it's not just so black and white as saying European winemaking method and then traditional, and they're completely separate. Not always that way. Some producers are now doing skin contact within the European methods, for example, in stainless steel, like they do in other countries in the world, for example. So some of the styles we'll find for the European winemaking methods. So dry wines make up the majority of PDO wines in Georgia. That's protected designation of origin quality wine, for example. Grapes can come into the winery as whole bunches and can be pressed whole bunches, or they can be separated from their stems. Depends on the philosophy behind the winemaking team and the estate. Stainless steel, oak barrels, vats, concrete are all used. Where oak is used, it tends to be either Caucasian oak, so from the forests of northern Georgia, or from French oak. They tend to be the most common. And typically old oak. There is very frugal use of oak here. So purchasing new oak barrels tends to be a rarity for many places. It's usually that barrels are traded and they usually have quite a lot of use. So therefore they're fairly neutral in what they can give to a wine. Malolactic conversion may be used, but it's often inhibited for more fruit-forward white wines. And that's to, of course, show off the grape variety. And in Georgia, a wine that is labeled as dry must have no more than 4 grams per litre residual sugar. Examples of very famous dry styles, then we have Zindali, which is up there on the screen for you, PDO. That's one that we talked about before. Typically is a blend of Rakatsiteli and Mutsvani Kakuri. So Rakatsiteli and Mutsvani Kakuri. Fermented in tank, sometimes aged in oak, but sometimes not. Usually these are quite fresh, dry styles, of course. Next up then, now because the dry wines must have less than 4 grams per litre residual sugar, some wines labelled as semi-sweet or semi-dry might not actually taste particularly sweet. And that's if we do compare it with other sweet wines of the world. Semi-sweet wines are usually made from later ripening varieties that would be put in qvevri or would ferment until fermentation stopped because of the hiatus that happens with the cold winter temperatures. And that leaves the wines naturally sweet and lower in alcohol. So fermentation begins in autumn after, of course, the production of the grapes. And then fermentation starts, and then, of course, the temperatures dramatically drop in such continental areas such as Kakheti, for example, and you get those bitterly cold winters. Now, if there's not temperature control within the facility, it's going to get very, very cold in that area, in that winery. And of course, the fermentation is going to slow down or completely stop without starting again. And of course, this will therefore produce a lower alcohol and sweeter expression. An example of one of the semi-sweet styles is the Tvishi PDO, and that's made from the grape variety Sulukuri, which I talked about on video 8, I believe it was. Sulukuri fits that MO. It is that style which is late ripening, and it's from the mountainous area of Lechkumi, where cold winter temperatures would stop the fermentation early, as just mentioned. Fortified white wines are made in some regions. The PDO Cardenachi, which we have up on the board as well, is a fortified sweet white wine made from a blend of Rakatsiteli, Kisi, Mutsvani, and Kichvi. those 4 varieties, fortified with grape spirit up to about 18% alcohol. And of course, we have sparkling wine production as well. It isn't a large amount of Georgian wine, but we do find some. Some wineries are utilizing the tank method, of course, what Prosecco and Asti in northern Italy are produced by. And some are experimenting with the traditional fermentation process, where the second fermentation occurs in bottle, like English sparkling wine, cava, or of course, champagne. Some producers are even making pet nats, pétillant natural. Now that is the style of old. There is a really great producer called Gotza, which is in around Tbilisi, very close to Tbilisi in the Kartli area, making some really fun pet nat sparkling wines. There is also there in that zone in Kartli a PDO. That's the Atenuri, which is a sparkling wine from Ateni in Kartli, made from Shinuri, grape variety, plus Garuli Mutsfani. It's a version of the method ancestrale. So it's traditionally made in qvevri, which was sealed before fermentation was complete, trapping carbon dioxide, and the wine therefore would have a light effervescence when it was opened. It's a one fermentation style of the method ancestrale, the ancient method. There are not many people producing this style, nor are sparkling wines very common across the whole of Georgia, but it is an increasing amount of interest, of course. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of white wine making. Of course, it's not really what all of the fuss is about when it comes to understanding Georgian wines. That's the next part. Part 10 will dive into the amber winemaking, where we'll look at the use of qvevri and skin contact across the country. So please do join me for part 10 to go through that. Once again, if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, pop them in the comments section below. And one of those comments could be about your experiences with a white wine of Georgia, or maybe an amber wine or a red wine. Let us know what you have experienced in terms of Georgian wine. You can also let me know about if you've visited a winery, if you've been to Tbilisi, Georgia. Let me know about your experiences. You can use the social media as well at the bottom of every slide if you'd like to get in touch. Otherwise, if you do manage to get yourself to the United Kingdom, where I reside, come and see me in one of my establishments, potentially for a class, more likely a glass, even more likely a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.